ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Dinozor Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. Except today, we're going to be learning how to be a less worse player, because we're going to be taking a look at the 5 mistakes that you need to stop making when playing Star Wars Unlimited. These are 5 mistakes for basic gameplay maneuvers that I've seen players make countless times in the past year of playing Star Wars Unlimited. Everyone from the newest of players to the most battle-hardened ones sometimes make these mistakes, and the smallest error could cost you not only the board but the entire game. So let's go ahead and take a quick peek at what those mistakes are, and then we're going to dive into each one by one, take a look at a few examples, of course. So the first one is going to be poor sequencing. This game is a game of sequencing. It is more akin to chess than it is to your average other TCG, because instead of playing an entire turn, you're just going to be playing one action, waiting for your opponent's action. So the sequence in which you're doing those actions can make a huge difference in a turn. Oops. Next up, we're going to be talking about ignoring the importance of initiative. Of course, there's some basic situations where just claiming the initiative is the best play, but more than that, just ignoring how important the initiative is can sometimes cost you heavily. Next up, we're going to be talking about not using or abusing the sideboard, depends on how you want to view it. This game from the ground up was made with a sideboard in mind. You need to use it. It is just another tool in your belt, another weapon in your arsenal, whatever you want to call it. Because otherwise, if you could make a deck that without a sideboard beats every single other deck, then why isn't everybody playing that deck? That's not a real possibility. You need to be using a sideboard to hone your deck to either remove some of its weaknesses for some matchups, or to even target some decks even more. Finally, number 4, we're going to be talking about playing into your opponent's strengths. Most decks have extremely strong plays that they want to be doing every single turn. A very basic example is, of course, when you're talking about a green villainy deck on 7 cost, they want to be playing Vader, right? So you don't want to be playing something that Vader can cleanly get rid of. So not only are they beating out your board, but they're developing theirs in a way that they already wanted to do. And finally, number 5 is going to be playing to survive instead of playing to win. Very often I've seen players make this mistake, trying to put some roadblocks in front of your opponent, and they're simply getting rid of it. Yeah, you're stalling a turn or two, but they are developing their board and making it so you just cannot come back. So sometimes it's better to be like, hey, if they have this card, I'm going to lose anyways, so I'm going to make this play. It has the highest chance of me actually winning. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to take a look at a few examples of each one. So the first one, of course, being poor sequencing. So poor sequencing would matter both when you're on offense or on defense. So we're going to take a look at some scenarios here. I've made some very basic cards. In this case, you're the one on defense, right? We're talking about the 4 resource turn. This is when Sabine deploys. You have been holding on to a takedown in your hand. You want to get rid of that Sabine, right? So how would you go about that? So in a situation where we don't know what Sabine has in their hand, right? It could be a typical Darksaber turn. You want to sequence in a way to force that Sabine out so you can use your takedown before they can put a Darksaber on. So here's an example of a terrible sequencing. So if you choose to attack with Green Squadron A-Wing first, you'll deal that 3 damage to their base. Then it's Sabine. If in a hypothetical situation, if Sabine goes ahead and trades their battlefield marine for your Ketsu Onyo here, both of the ground units are gone. The initiative is now yours. You need to do something. You need to play something. Even if you do some advanced techniques like just using Anakin with no effect, yeah, you'll take 2 damage to base, but then it's Sabine's turn again. Well, Sabine can then do the same thing. Use their ability, deal 1 damage to each base. Now it's back to you. There's some argument to be made that you can just pass, but very good chance that you'll just end up playing a Yoda or another Ketsu Onyo or something. And that's just not what you want to be doing, right? So if we go back to this, if instead of starting the turn with the Squadron A-Wing swing, if you do the same thing, if you start with Ketsu and trade with the Battlefield Marine, now there is nothing left on Sabine's board for them to take an action. So the only stalling tactic that they will have is using Sabine here to do 1 damage to each base, which you can follow up with the A-Wing dealing 3 damage to their base. At this point, Sabine has to do something, either play something from their hand or deploy their Sabine, and if they do end up deploying their Sabine, there you go, you get the takedown. That's exactly what you wanted to do anyways. And if they do choose to pass for some reason, trying to bait you into a play, well, you can just claim, because let's be real, Sabine is a very fast deck. They want to be playing early. If you're claiming it, yeah, no one played anything this turn, but it's kind of what you want, right, versus Sabine? Now, the same can be used, of course, offensively if you are the one who wants to do as much damage as possible. So in this situation here, a good example would be that you have a Chewbacca in your hand that you want to be playing, but you're versus a Quinlan. I don't know why I put Quinlan blue. I meant to put Quinlan red here. Let's go ahead and quickly change that out. And you know that Quinlan has 4 open, and if you play a Chewbacca, there's a good chance that they will have some kind of way to deal with it, namely a disabling Fangfighter, for example, as we see in their hand here. So your sequencing would matter a lot. If you choose to use the Battlefield Marine to either hit their base or hit Greedo first. So if you hit their base, then they can use Greedo to, let's say, either trade or hit your base as well. Then the action is back to you, and you need to play something. And at this case, if you do play that Chewbacca, it'll immediately get removed, and then your A-Wing is facing down a Fangfighter here, which is horrible for you, because you could, yeah, of course you could trade, but if you choose to hit their base instead, that Fangfighter gets a free trade on you. That's just bad overall. So if instead of doing that, if that Marine hits that Greedo, you go up into the same situation as earlier, except this time on the offense. Now Quinlan has to play something. Forget the Luke and the Village Protector there. They will probably end up playing something from their hand here. Even if they play something like an Ahsoka, it doesn't matter. Then you can follow that up with a Chewbacca here, and yeah, sure. Let's say they played. Let's pretend this is something else, right? Let's pretend this is a K2S. So they ended up playing this, and you put a Chewbacca in. You get the swing 6 damage to their base at this point. That is pretty good for you. That's exactly what you wanted. Yes, of course, at this point they could claim initiative and then play the disabling Fangfighter, but then that's their 5 resource turn where they're forced to use a 3 resource card to get rid of your 3 resource card. No one's coming out ahead there, and you've already dealt 6 damage to them. You come out a bit stronger in that situation. And the last example we're going to be taking a look at for poor sequencing is going to be an example that we saw recently in one of our games showcased on this YouTube channel. Is going to be when you are playing Kylo and you are versus an Anakin. It is your flip turn in this case. What do you do, right? So let's say the initiative is with the Anakin. They've already used their C-3PO to attack. So you have plenty of options to stall and sequence this correctly. A good example would be, so you are going to flip, right? And in a perfect world, you want to be able to flip and then use a fallen lightsaber on Kylo, right? That is the usual win condition of a Kylo. So in a perfect world, you would probably end up using your stormtrooper to attack their base, forcing it so they then need to probably trade into that stormtrooper with the Yoda. And then the action is back to you, right? That Yoda would have taken 3 damage. The action is yours. You get to swing into their base for 3, but that leaves some time for the Anakin player to do something. If instead you stall it out a bit, if let's say you use Kylo's ability, you throw out that 5th brother, buff this disabling Fangfighter by 2. Yeah, of course, at this point, the Anakin could be using the open fire or takedown that is in their hand to get rid of this. But even if let's say they do that, yeah, sure, they saved 5 damage on their base, but now you get to flip. You get to put a fallen lightsaber. You're hitting their base for 8. Fallen lightsaber is dealing 1 damage to both of their units. That is an extremely very clean way to deal with the entire state of the game. And we see how that tiny little sequencing difference made such a huge impact on the turn, because if instead of discarding that, if you ended up swinging here instead, if Anakin stalled in any way whatsoever, let's say they did this, right? And yeah, they took 2 damage to their base, they stalled, now it's yours. And if you deploy here and they do actually take down or open fire your Kylo, sorry, I don't know why it's not flipping over. Not the best at Tabletop Simulator, but that's okay. If they got rid of your Kylo immediately, then you're stuck with a fallen lightsaber in your hand. You have nothing to play this on. That is not where you want to be. All right, and now we're going to go back here to the next one is going to be ignoring the importance of initiative. Initiative is a very, very strong tool in this game. Going first in a turn can make it so you can set up a sentinel before your opponent gets to attack your base or gets rid of one of their big creatures that they want to be playing before they can do anything with it. So let's take a look at a few examples here. So a great first example is going to be looking at this situation. You didn't have the initiative. Anakin had the initiative. They ended up playing a Luke, and you still have 4 resources open here. In your hand, you're holding a Devastator and a bunch of other cards, and you have the 4 resources to be doing something else. It is your turn to act here. However, as far as you can see, that there is no clean way for you to be getting rid of that Luke Skywalker, right? You could choose to instead attack their base, then play an interceptor, get rid of that. You did clean up a lot of their board, but you still have to deal with that Luke Skywalker. And if you do end up doing it that way, that Luke Skywalker will start cleaning up your board. So let's say we put down the interceptor, got rid of their unit, they claim. Sure, we can do 3 to their base, but since they claimed, the Anakin player will then use that Luke to get rid of the 5th brother cleanly. This will go to 4 damage, of course, but that's a lot less than it could have been. So if we take the same example, and instead of playing something, even if we are wasting the 4 resources, if we choose to at this point claim, we know that they are completely tapped out, all of their resources are tapped. In this situation, we are saying that Anakin is no longer an option here. We just claim, we lose out on that 3 damage, but that's okay because next turn our 5th brother can then swing, normally swinging for only 4, but using his own skill will go up to 3 here. Doesn't matter if it's 5th brother or not, even if this is just another creature that can attack for at least 5. That can cleanly trade into the Luke. So yes, you did waste out a few resources, but you managed to deal with a 7-cost unit with your own 3-cost unit that was already even injured. So even with the wasted resources, you're up in terms of resource value. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example of the initiative being important here. You are up against a Quinlan. That Quinlan used their 6 resources to play a Millennium Falcon, get rid of whatever you had in space. In this situation, actually, the base health will matter. For some reason, it doesn't save here. And this is not a promising situation for you. You're currently at 16 damage on your base. You are facing an Ahsoka and a K2SO that are dealing upwards of 7 damage to your base, but you know that your opponent only has 2 resources open. Now, in that situation, you already know that if their opponent has a surprise strike for that extra 3 damage, you lose anyways, right? So what would be your best play here at 8 resources? You have the option to definitely use a Stormtrooper, get rid of that Ahsoka. That K2SO would only end up doing 4 damage to your base, but then no matter what you play, they would claim initiative, they would use that surprise strike, or not even, they can just claim the initiative and the Falcon would hit your base and you would lose, correct? Of course. But if instead you look at this situation and be like, okay, well, how can I abuse the initiative here? Because my opponent needs a lot of actions here to win, assuming they don't have a surprise strike. Well, if on my 8 resource turn, I choose to simply play a Devastator here, and instead of trying to deal with any of the board, I simply do 4 damage to their base, they are now in a position where they need to deal with this Devastator, and they only have 2 resources. So unless they already have some other way to deal with this next turn, if they try to attack here, if they even do one simple swing with K2, you claim initiative, that's it, your Devastator can swing for game. And knowing that usually in a Tarkin Town Quinlan deck, there is nothing that can deal with such a big creature for 2 resources, your opponent's only option here is to claim initiative. That Devastator essentially saved 7 damage from your base, if they even have a way to deal with it. If they don't have a way to deal with it, you just won the game off that one simple play, just because of how important the initiative is. All right, next up, we're going to be taking a look at not using or abusing your sideboard. Every single deck that you see topping these tournaments have a very clean, thought out sideboard. And the reason why it's so important, as I mentioned it earlier, is because the sideboard should be a part of your deck. It is an extension of your deck that is being used to either get rid of some of its weaknesses, or maybe there is a certain matchup that you struggle against. Well, you want to be targeting some cards to be adding into your sideboard in case you go up against that matchup. We're going to be taking a look here at some examples here. The first one we're going to be taking a look at is from a Tarkin player in our locals. This is a very low to the ground deck. As we can see, there are a lot of low drops, plenty of 1 cost, upwards of 15 turn 1 plays. Over half the deck is 2 or 3 costs, so they are usually okay against faster decks, but this kind of deck most likely struggles against ramp slower decks such as blue heroism, like the Yoda decks or the Quinlan deck. Not Quinlan. The Yoda decks, Ray decks, or maybe even a Kira Datavolt that is starting to get quite a bit of a meta taste. And so we see here in the sideboard that this player has chosen to play 3 Crate Dragons, 3 resupplies that are perfect examples of how to target your sideboard for a specific matchup. So any deck that is able to be slower than this, you're not going to try and outvalue a Kira who plays 3 Devastators, 3 Avengers, some Reinforcement Walkers. You're not going to be able to do that. So in this case, this player decided to simply add another way to pose even more of a threat for those decks in the Crate Dragons and the resupplies. We also see the disabling Fang Fighters, as we know that in Villainy, especially Command and Aggression, there are not many ways to deal with an upgraded unit. For example, a Chewbacca or a Luke Skywalker or something like that that's been put on a ship on turn 2. So disabling Fang Fighter is a great answer to that, as well as to the Bosk players that are running around putting bounties on things. And of course, we have some Troopers just in case we go up against something aggressive and we just want more Sentinels. So we see that each card actually has a very important role. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the Sabine Wren ECL deck that won a tournament recently. I believe it was one of the sector qualifiers, if I remember correctly. And of course, this is your typical Sabine deck that everyone has seen countless times, but the sideboard is what is important. And now we see the 2 confiscates for pretty much the same reason I mentioned earlier for the Fang Fighters. You need some answer to those upgrade heavy decks, whether that's for aggressive pilot upgrades or Bosk upgrades that are pretty devastating to Sabine. The top target killing one of your units, healing the base 5-6. You don't want to see that. Now, of course, we do see a bit more defensive cards in Bright Hope and another Sundari Priestkeeper, 2 of them in main deck, of course. You do definitely want to be seeing those when you're going up against the mirror. You want to be able to put up some roadblocks, and while Bright Hope is normally not a very aggressive card, just sometimes putting that Sentinel in the space is enough to buy you time to end the game on ground. Heroic Sacrifice is just another pump in case you're in a matchup where your units are not surviving anyways. You might as well get extra damage out of them. And of course, we see the Freedom Fighters here. Usually used to be a main deck card for Sabine, but an important note is they have taken it out of their deck in the main deck, mostly because the second most popular deck at the moment is Quinlan, and Quinlan is famous for being able to ping and target down one of your units. And so even though the fighters are extremely powerful units, if you have the main deck, they could be a liability when you're going up against one of the most common matchups in Quinlan. You still want them though, versus all those other decks that are running things like Village Protector, sometimes having that Saboteur that you can even ambush out with Energy Conversion Lab, or just having another source of extra base damage is a good card to have in the sideboard. Finally, we're going to be taking a look at Kira Datavolt. We mentioned this earlier, a very greedy, slow deck, as we can see, upwards of 15 late game cards, and of course quite a bit of early stuff to prevent aggro, right? We see this deck is very polarized in the low costs and high costs, not much in the middle. And so if we look at the sideboards, they are very targeted sideboard cards. We see the Confiscate for the same reason we mentioned previously. We have the top targets for some healing versus those aggressive decks. We have the No Glory, only 2 copies in the main, so a third one there in case you're going up against a lot of Chewbacca's or K2SOs or anything like that. And then for the more targeted ones, we have Palpatine's Return, which not only helps you out in those grindy late matchups when you have to recycle your units over and over, but it's also extremely good versus the discard decks such as Quinlan that's running around. If their Quinlan chooses to discard early and you throw away a Vader or Maul, you get the Palps Return that, get them out the turn earlier, and win the momentum back in your favor. Finally, we have Relentless and Devastator in case you're going up against somewhat of a mirror in those heavy event decks. What's interesting here is that a lot of control-y decks usually have Restock or Vigilances in their sideboard. In this case, Vigilance is in the main board, but Restock is not. I guess this player is relying a bit more on the fact that Data Vault lets them have more cards in their deck, so they probably don't need to restock their deck back when you're going up against a mirror match of Mill. But just goes to show how important your each individual decision is in a sideboard. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at playing into your opponent's strengths. Each deck, as we mentioned, has very strong key turns that they want to be playing into. Of course, most decks, their key turn is when their leader flips, but that's not the case for every single deck. A very good example of that is, of course, Sabine Wren, when we're talking about ECLing out a Wrecker, one of their strongest plays possible. Or, as we mentioned, decks that have their key cards at certain costs, of course, like the Darth Vader coming out at 7, or Luke Skywalker coming out at 7, or Ahsoka coming out down at 4 for Quinlan. Regardless, you need to be knowing what your opponent wants to do every single turn, and of course the best way to know that is through practice and by looking at your opponent's deck lists over the weeks of them playing, keeping up with the meta. So we're going to take a look at a few examples here of this and how you can not fall into this trap. Right, so the first scenario we're going to be looking at here is going to be set up the health here. We're talking about a situation where the board is completely clean. You're versus a Sabine, and it is a 6 resource turn. You're playing Anakin, you're dangerously low, you're up to 18 damage out of your 25 on your base. Why you're playing Security Complex doesn't matter. You could easily have been a Colossus, but with a bit more damage on base, just for the sake of the example. So of course you have 6 resources open. The Sabine with the initiative chose to do their ping, and so now it is up to you. And what do you do in this situation? So if you think about, oh, what does my opponent want to play here? They probably want to play a Wrecker. They probably want to ECL it out. So if I were to simply play what seems like the best play here, which is an Obi-Wan Kenobi, if I play this out, my opponent will simply ECL out a Wrecker, get rid of one of their resources, deal 5 damage to this Obi-Wan, and then with the ECL's ambush, end up doing 6 damage to my base, putting me 1 away. So at that point, all they need to do is claim, and then Sabine for game. And the worst part is that Wrecker doesn't even die there, so you not only need to heal up, but you also need to get rid of it. Yes, of course, you have some options based on what you have. For example, you can Vigilance, but it is putting you so far behind that is not a position you want to be in. So if instead of doing that, if you choose to make another play here, if let's say you want to play a Village Protector, the same issue occurs, right? Yes, you have a shield here, of course, but Wrecker comes in, pops the shield, ambushes in. In this case, they're going to be ambushing in only for 5 instead of 6, but it's still putting you at a very dangerous level. At that point, they can simply top deck a For a Cause I Believe in or something, and you would lose. So, contrary to what seems like obvious, your best play here is probably to play something that a Wrecker would not want to ambush in after using his when played, or something that will simply die to the when played of Wrecker. For example, if you play a Kanan here or a Yoda here, doesn't matter, either one would work. I think Yoda would be ideal here because that would leave you with 3 resources open to play something else later, potentially. If you play a Yoda here, that Wrecker could definitely come in with an ambush. Sure, that with ambush would only end up doing 3 to your base. And then you can follow that up with a Village Protector. If instead of ambush, that Wrecker chooses to simply get rid of a resource without ambushing and kill your Yoda, well, you just saved a ton of damage on your base. That's what you want. Same thing with a Kanan, however, of course, if they do end up using the When Played ability to kill that Kanan, yeah, you have nothing on board, but next turn, you can simply start putting your other roadblocks in. And not only that, it is your 6 resources, and this is your 6 resource turn. This is when your Anakin actually flips. That is what you want as well. However, if you do the initial plays that we talked about, such as putting a Village Protector down or an Obi-Wan down, you no longer have the time to deploy Anakin, because if you deploy Anakin, you lose the initiative, you lose the game. So if you do end up playing a low cost here, baiting out that Wrecker, not letting your opponent do the play they want to do, then you can set up your roadblocks. That should give you time to bring out your Anakin. Then you can start dealing damage to their base or to their Wrecker, and that is how you did not play into their strength. Next, we're going to be taking a look at another example here. A very common occurrence, this especially in the current meta when we're talking about Quinlan Voss or Cad Bane. Turn 1 play, I think this is a play that everybody is aware of. You have the initiative as Sabine. What do? Well, if you do the obvious play and simply play an A-Wing or play a Battlefield Marine, they will simply play any Underworld card, which is most of their deck, end up doing 1 damage to it, and then they can simply use their Tarkin Town to get rid of it. So now you simply lost your first turn play. They have developed the board, you haven't. That is one of their main strengths of that deck. You don't want to be playing into it. So a good way to be playing into that, if you do have the initiative here as Sabine, you can simply choose to, as your first action, tap. You're slowing it down. You're putting the action back on them. This is somewhat of an initiative manipulating or sequencing that we talked about earlier, but this is also one of the key strengths of the Cad Bane or Quinlan Voss decks that you don't want to be playing into. You force them to take an action, so that way if they do play a Greedo, then you can follow it up with something else and play it normally. Alright, next up we're going to be taking a look at playing to survive instead of playing to win. This is one of the most common mistakes that I see players making, and not thinking ahead, not always having in the back of your mind, what do I need to do to end this game? When people get bogged down into the current board state, the current hand, they kind of forget what their deck is trying to do, what their opponent is trying to do, and they forget to play the best way possible. So we'll go ahead and take a look at some examples here. Here we go. The first example, we're going to go ahead and add some damage to the bases for this example. And your opponent here would be at 20. If you find yourself in this situation and you have a Yoda, the initiative is yours, your opponent has already attacked quite a bit, you see that they have a fallen brother, but you are versus a Kylo, you're at 19 damage. If you choose to use your Yoda to get rid of what seems to be the best play here, if you attack with Yoda into their Stormtrooper, yes, you will heal yourself for 2, but at that point your opponent will most likely take initiative here. Even when you're at 17, it sets them up in a way where their 5th brother will end up doing a ton of damage to your base, or heck, even if you put a Sentinel down, their Fang Fighter will deal that 3 to your base, and then that still puts you back to up to 20. You're at range for reach. There's quite a bit of reach in aggressive decks. Of course, here there's the potential for Chaos of War, Ruthless Raider, anything of the sort. So contrary to what you might think, the play to survive here, yes, of course, it is to play down a Sentinel, it is to attack with Yoda, but the play to win here is knowing that your opponent only has 2 resources left. Even if they use Kylo's ability to discard that card to give the Stormtrooper an extra 2 attack, that is not enough to kill you. So what you need to do in order to win this game instead of just survive it is to, for example, in this situation, smuggle out your Millennium Falcon. Yes, you used up all your resources. It doesn't seem like it's a smart play, but you need to understand that in an aggressive deck, in a double aggression deck like this, there are not any commonly used pumps that would be able to give your opponent the win this turn. So with this situation, you forced your opponent to either make a bad play in attacking. If they do attack, you simply claim initiative, Falcon hits for game, you win. Or they need to claim and hope that they draw an answer, some way to deal with your Falcon. And if they do, then you're back to square one. Then your Yoda can end up getting rid of one of their units, healing 2 anyways, or you can just drop a Sentinel at that point anyways. So it's just a great example of thinking outside the box and not making the obvious play that would just let you stall out the game, but instead making a play that's actively moving you towards victory. And finally, one of the last examples we're going to be taking a look at here is going to be this situation that came up recently at a PQ that I was in. We're talking about a situation where the health here does matter significantly. Your opponent is at 22 health on their base, and you are at 15. You don't seem to be in threat of dying at any point, but the board is severely in your opponent's favor. What is the correct play? Of course, your opponent is only 3 damage off from dying, So what seems like an obvious play is to play a Millennium Falcon here. Millennium Falcon swinging in would be giving you the win, but if you do play that Falcon, Yoda attacks. When Yoda attacks, they would heal for 2, putting them out of reach. And then if you do attack with the Falcon, well, next turn they get to swing with Luke and potentially even either kill you outright or just heal enough out of range of your win. So instead, what would be an ideal play here, oops, no, not the Luke, the Yoda is up and your opponent is at 22. The right answer here, oh, I forgot even the most important thing. If you do play that Falcon, the Anakin can simply use the Anakin ability and trade into it with the Disabling Fang Fighter, which completely nullifies all of your damage. So another obvious play is to simply play Andor here from your smuggle, which comes in ready. Of course, a new card would be smuggled in. You would be tapped out here. You would only have 1 resource left. That said, your opponent can't really get rid of the Andor, but they could attack to your base. Same scenario happens where they heal for 2, and even if you do the 3 damage to them, they get the initiative. And with the initiative, that Luke can kill your Andor, heal back down to 3, and you're once again in a position where you are behind. You need to find an answer somehow. So contrary to what is the obvious play, the right play in this situation is to smuggle out the Andor, but not attack. Because now if you smuggle out the Andor and your opponent makes the optimal play here in attacking your base with Yoda, yes, they healed back down to 20. They were at 22 at the beginning of the scenario. They healed back down to 20, and you went up to 17. And instead of attacking, if at this point you choose to simply claim initiative, knowing that your deck has a lot of options of pump, knowing that in your deck of cards, you have so many ways of dishing out that extra 2 damage, but only on the condition that you already have a unit, which is in this case, of course, you need 2 damage. So in your deck, you know that there's probably 3 surprise strikes, 3 hot shots. You might even already have a hot shot in your resources. So if you choose to simply not attack, claim initiative, your opponent is tapped out, can't really do anything here. At this point, you claim, you draw. If you draw a surprise strike, you win. If you draw a hot shot, you win. If you already have a hot shot, you win. So it's about understanding what are your possibilities, what are your outs, what are your ways to win the game and not just stall it. Because if you stall this game, yeah, it's going on for another 2 turns, but you're gonna lose at the end anyways. So you want to make the play that has the best chance of giving you the win. And knowing that your deck in this situation has 6 potential cards out of, at this stage in the game, probably 30 to 35 left in your deck, those are pretty good odds. You want to play those odds. You want to play in a way that's going to give you the highest odds of winning. And honestly, that was it for the last point. And so with all that said, what are your thoughts? What do you think? Are there any common mistakes that I forgot to mention? Do you think some of these are not mistakes? Am I just talking out of my ass? I would love to hear what you guys think about this. And once again, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you guys next time.